She was left for dead in the Arizona desert with a burlap sack over her head. Her wrists were bound with rope so tight it cut to the bone. Her sobs were muffled, lost in the endless, scorching landscape. The men who did this wanted her to die slowly, silently. But they made one mistake. They left a witness. Not her, but the young cowboy who crested a rocky ridge just as she collapsed. He was only tracking a stray cow, a simple task on a simple day. Or so he thought, because the woman he was about to find wasn't just a victim of a random attack. And the outlaws who put her there weren't after money. They were after a secret she didn't even know she had. Hank Prescott pulled hard on the reins, his mare coming to a sharp halt. Down below, a figure stumbled awkwardly across the flatlands. Even from this distance, Hank could see the distress. It was a woman, her dress tattered, and she had a sack over her head. "What in tarnation?" Hank muttered, pushing his worn hat back. He didn't hesitate. He guided his horse down the rocky slope, dust kicking up in a cloud behind him. As he got closer, he heard the sound. A desperate, muffled whimper. Faith heard the hoofbeats and her blood ran cold. They were back. They had come back to finish the job. She dropped to her knees, her body shaking so hard she thought she'd come apart. "Please," she whimpered, her voice swallowed by the rough burlap. "Please don't hurt me any more." Hank dismounted, his boots soft in the dust. He approached slow. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The voice was unfamiliar, gentle, not like the cruel, gravelly voices of her attackers. "Who's there?" she cried out. "Don't come any closer." "I mean you no harm," Hank said, his voice steady. He was close enough now to see the dried blood on the ropes, the raw skin of her wrists. "I'm just a cowboy. Let me help you." He reached for the sack. Faith flinched but didn't pull away. His calloused fingers found the edge and he lifted it slowly, and his breath caught in his chest. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears. Her honey-colored hair was a tangled mess. But her eyes, a startling, piercing green, gazed up at him with a mix of terror and desperate hope. "An angel," Hank whispered, stunned. Faith blinked in the sudden, blinding light. The man kneeling before her had sun-bronzed skin and kind hazel eyes filled with a concern that felt real. He wasn't one of them. "Can you stand?" he asked, already working at the knots on her wrists. "I think so," she said, her voice weak. "They left me here to die." "Who did this to you?" Hank's voice turned hard as he finally freed her hands, his anger rising as he saw the raw, bleeding wounds. "The Barton gang," she whispered. "They raided our stagecoach yesterday, killed everyone, took everything." She choked back a sob. "They said I saw too much." Hank's jaw was a tight line of muscle. The Barton gang's reputation for pure evil was known across the territory. "You're safe now," he said, helping her to her feet. "I'm Hank Prescott. I work at the Double Creek Ranch, about 10 miles from here." "Faith Turner," she replied, swaying on unsteady legs. "I was traveling to Tucson." "You need water and rest, Miss Turner," Hank said, supporting her. "And those wrists need tending." He glanced at his horse. "Can you ride? I'll take you to the ranch. The foreman's wife, she's good at doctoring." Faith nodded, too weak to argue. He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, his arms a protective cage around her as he took the reins. The feeling of his strong presence was so overwhelming, so safe, she nearly forgot the terror. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought I was going to die." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Hank said quietly. "I wasn't even supposed to be out this far today." As they rode, Faith's exhaustion finally won. She leaned back against his solid chest and fell into a dreamless void. Hank felt her go limp and tightened his grip, a fierce, protective feeling rising in him that he had never felt before. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. He didn't know what it was. But he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that his life had just changed forever. The Double Creek Ranch appeared like a mirage as the sun bled toward the horizon. Cowboys stopped their work, staring as Hank rode in with the unconscious woman cradled in his arms. "Hank, what you got there?" one of the older hands called out. "Found her in the desert," Hank said, his voice tight. "Get Mrs. Holbrook." He rode straight to the main house. Clara Holbrook, the foreman's wife, was already on the porch, her face a mask of concern. She was a practical woman, her hands weathered by years of frontier life. "Good heavens," she breathed as Hank carefully dismounted with Faith in his arms. "Bring her inside, now." Clara worked with quick efficiency, preparing a bed while Hank told her the little he knew. "The Barton gang," Clara muttered, her lips a thin, angry line as she examined Faith's wrists. "Those boys need to swing for this. This poor child. Will she be all right?" Hank asked, lingering in the doorway, unable to leave. "She's dehydrated and exhausted, but she's strong," Clara said, giving him a knowing look. "Now you get back to your duties. I'll tend to her." Hank left, but his mind stayed in that room. The image of Faith's green eyes, so full of terror and strength, was burned into his memory. He tried to work, but his hands felt clumsy, his thoughts a tangled mess. Faith woke to the smell of stew and the feel of a soft mattress. For a moment she was lost, the comfort so alien after the horror. Then she saw Clara Holbrook sitting in a chair by the bed. "Easy now," Clara said, her voice a warm balm. "You're safe. You're at the Double Creek Ranch." Over a bowl of stew that tasted like life itself, Faith told her story. The trip from Missouri after her parents died. The aunt waiting in Tucson. The sudden, brutal attack. "They killed everyone else," she said, her voice hollow. "Their leader. He said I was too much trouble to keep." "Well, you're safe now, dear," Clara said, patting her hand. "You stay here as long as you need." Later that evening, a soft knock came at her door. It was Hank. He stood there, hat in hand, looking almost shy. "Miss Turner," he said, "just wanted to see if you were feeling better." Faith managed a small smile. "Thanks to you, Mr. Prescott." "Hank, please," and anyone would have done the same. "We both know that's not true," she said softly. And in that moment, something passed between them. A connection forged in dust and desperation. He shifted his feet. "Well, Mrs. Holbrook says you're welcome to stay. It's no imposition. Ranch gets lonely sometimes." His cheeks turned a shade darker. "Especially for such a nice face." After he left, Faith went to the window. The moon was rising over a landscape that had tried to kill her just hours before. But now it looked different, almost peaceful. And for the first time since the attack, she felt a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. But a question nagged at the back of her mind. Hank said he wasn't supposed to be out that far. So why was he? Days bled into a week. A rider was sent to Faith's aunt in Tucson, who replied with a letter full of relief and instructions to travel when she was well. But Faith wasn't in a hurry. She found a strange comfort in the rhythms of the ranch, in the simple, hard work that left no room for thinking. And she found comfort in Hank. He found an excuse to see her every day. A question for the foreman, a tool that needed fetching from the main house. The other cowboys teased him without mercy, but he didn't care. Those few minutes, watching her smile, hearing her laugh, were worth all of it. For Faith, his visits were like splashes of cool water in the desert of her grief. He was steady, quiet, and strong. When he talked about his dream of owning his own ranch one day, his eyes shone with a light that warmed her from the inside out. One evening he found her on the porch mending an apron. He stood there for a long moment, twisting his hat in his hands before he finally got the words out. "Faith, I was wondering if you might join me for a ride tomorrow. There's a place, a small lake. I thought you might like it." "I'd like that very much, Hank," she said, her heart giving a little jump. The next day was perfect. They rode side by side, the vast Arizona sky a brilliant blue above them. He'd found her a gentle mare, and she rode with an easy grace that surprised him. "My father taught me," she said, a sad smile touching her lips. "Back in Missouri. It feels like a lifetime ago." He asked about her life there, and she told him about her carpenter father and schoolteacher mother, about a simple, happy life that had been wiped out by influenza. "I'm sorry," Hank said, his own voice quiet. "I lost my folks young, too. A mining accident. Then consumption." In that shared moment of loss, another thread was woven between them. The lake was a hidden gem, a splash of impossible blue surrounded by cottonwood trees. Hank spread a blanket in the shade and unpacked a lunch Clara had sent with them. As they ate, the tension in Faith's shoulders finally began to melt away. She laughed as he told stories of cowboy pranks, a sound that felt rusty and new all at once. Then Hank's expression turned serious. "I've been thinking about the Barton gang." Faith's smile vanished. "What about them?" "They need to be stopped," he said, his voice hard. "What they did to you. They need to face justice. When you get to Tucson, you have to tell the sheriff." "I know," she said, looking down at the fading scars on her wrists. "But I'm afraid, Hank. What if they come looking for me?" "I won't let anything happen to you," he said, his voice fierce. The air grew thick with unspoken words. "When you go," Hank said, his voice carefully neutral, "have you decided when?" Faith met his gaze, her heart starting to beat a little faster. "I should go soon. My aunt is waiting." "No one's rushing you," he said quickly. "Everyone enjoys having you here." He paused, his gaze dropping to the blade of grass he was shredding with his fingers. "Especially me." The confession hung between them, simple and honest. "These have been precious days for me too, Hank," she whispered. He leaned closer, his eyes asking a question she answered with a slight, trembling nod. The kiss was gentle at first, a soft exploration. But then something deeper ignited, a spark of desperate, unexpected feeling that left them both breathless. "I never expected to find you," he murmured against her forehead. "Maybe it was meant to be," she whispered back. "A terrible thing that led to something wonderful." But as they rode back to the ranch, hand in hand, Faith's mind was snagged on a detail she couldn't shake. When she'd told him about the attack, about the Barton gang, he hadn't seemed surprised. His anger had been real, but there was something else in his eyes. Recognition. It was almost as if he'd been expecting to hear that name. News of their romance spread through the ranch like a grass fire, but a welcome one. It was a good story, a bright spot in a hard world. 2 days later, that world came crashing in. A rider galloped into the ranch, his horse lathered. "The Barton gang!" he yelled. "Spotted near Willow Springs. The sheriff's forming a posse." Hank's face turned to stone. "I'll go," he said without a second's thought. "Hank, no!" Faith cried, grabbing his arm. "It's too dangerous." "That's why they have to be stopped," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "What they did to you, Faith, they can't get away with it." He pulled her close. "I promise I'll be careful. I have too much to live for now." He rode out the next morning with 3 other men. Faith watched until they were just specks on the horizon, a cold knot of fear tightening in her stomach. The next 4 days were a special kind of hell. Every sound, every distant rider sent her heart into a frantic gallop. News trickled in. There had been a shootout at an old mine. Some of the gang were captured, but the leader, Clyde Barton, had escaped. Then, at dusk on the 4th day, they returned. Faith saw them coming and ran, her heart in her throat. Hank was in the lead, but he was slumped in his saddle, his left shoulder wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage. "You're hurt," she gasped, helping him dismount. "Just a graze," he said, but his pale face told a different story. As she and Clara cleaned and rebandaged the wound, he told them what happened. We caught them by surprise, got 4 of them, but Barton and 2 others slipped away. His expression grew dark. One of them, he recognized me, Faith. He called me by name. Faith's hands started to tremble. He asked if I'd found any interesting packages in the desert lately. The blood drained from Faith's face. They knew. They knew she was alive. They knew where she was. They're locked up, Hank tried to reassure her. Barton's on the run. They won't come here. But the seed of terror had been replanted. That night, Faith didn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin, every howl of a distant coyote was the sound of approaching death. By morning, she had made up her mind. I have to go to Tucson, she told Hank at breakfast. As long as I'm here, I'm putting all of you in danger. Faith, no, he said, his good hand gripping hers across the table. We'll face them together. This isn't your fight, Hank. You made it my fight the day I found you, he said, his voice low and intense. Stay. Stay and build a life with me. He took a deep breath. I love you, Faith. I know it's fast, but I've never been more certain of anything. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of joy. I love you too, Hank, she whispered. I think I have since you lifted that sack and looked at me like I was something precious instead of broken. You are precious, he said fiercely, and you are not broken. 2 weeks later, Faith wrote to her aunt, explaining everything. The wedding was set for October. As the day approached, a fragile peace settled over the ranch. But Faith couldn't shake the outlaw's words. He called me by name. How did a member of the Barton gang know a simple cowboy from the Double Creek Ranch? The wedding was beautiful. Faith wore a simple ivory dress, her hair woven with wildflowers. Hank stood watching her walk toward him, his face filled with a love so pure it ached. When I found you that day, he whispered, taking her hands, I never knew I was finding my future. That night, in their own small cabin, he gave her a wedding gift. It was a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was my mother's, he said. It's all I have left of her. Faith opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single tarnished silver locket. She lifted it out. It was heavy and strangely familiar. She opened the tiny clasp. On one side was a faded miniature portrait of a woman she didn't recognize. On the other, tucked behind the frame, was a tiny folded piece of paper. She carefully worked it free and unfolded it. It was a map, a crude hand-drawn map of a small section of the Arizona Territory, and on it a single spot was marked with an X. Next to the X, a name was written in faded ink. Barton. Faith's blood turned to ice. She looked up at Hank, her mind reeling. Hank, what is this? He looked at the map, then at her, and his face was a mask of confusion. I don't know. I've never seen that before. But his eyes betrayed him. For a split second she saw it again. The same flicker of recognition she'd seen when she first told him the name of her attackers. The same look that told her he was lying. Her rescuer, her husband, the man she loved. He knew more than he was saying. He had known from the very beginning. And in that horrifying moment, Faith Turner realized she had married a stranger. You're lying, she whispered, the words like shards of glass in her throat. The locket felt like a lead weight in her hand. Hank's face went pale. Faith, I swear I've never seen that map. Don't, she said, her voice shaking with a cold fury. Don't lie to me. I saw it in your eyes the day you found me. You knew the name. Barton. You knew it. And that outlaw in the shootout. He knew you. How, Hank? How does a common outlaw know a simple cowboy by name? He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence in the small cabin was suffocating. He was trapped, and they both knew it. "My father," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "He wasn't a miner. Not really. He was a prospector, and he was partners with a man named Jedediah Barton." Faith stared at him, her mind refusing to connect the dots. "Clyde Barton's father?" Hank nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "They struck silver, a huge vein up in the mountains near Silver Creek. The map. That map leads to it. They were going to be rich." "What happened?" Faith asked, her voice trembling. "Greed happened. Barton wanted it all. There was an accident, a cave-in. My father was killed. Jedediah Barton walked away with the map and the claim. He changed his name, vanished. My mother spent the rest of her life trying to find him, to get back what was ours. The locket. It was all she had left of my father's work." The story poured out of him, a torrent of long-buried pain. After his mother died, Hank had taken up the search. He'd spent years drifting, working ranches, listening, always listening for the name Barton. "The stagecoach robbery," Faith said, the horrific truth dawning on her. "It was in the papers. When I heard the Barton gang was responsible, I knew it had to be Clyde, Jedediah's son. I rode out looking for them, not for a stray cow, for them. He had been hunting them, the same men who had attacked her. I found you instead," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw what they did to you, and everything changed. The revenge, the silver. It didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was you." Faith wanted to believe him, desperately. But a new, colder question was forming in her mind. "The locket," she said, her voice flat. "It was in your mother's box, but the map was hidden inside it. You said you'd never seen the map before. How can that be true?" Hank looked confused. "I don't know, I swear. My mother never mentioned a map. She just said the locket was a reminder. But something didn't add up. The pieces didn't fit." The outlaw had recognized Hank. He'd asked about an interesting package. He wasn't talking about Faith. He was talking about the locket. They were looking for it, which meant they didn't have the map, which meant Clyde Barton, the son of the man who stole the mine, didn't know where it was. So, who did? Then she remembered. The stagecoach, the attack. They hadn't just taken valuables. They had been searching for something, tearing open bags, ripping apart luggage. One of the passengers, an old man with a leather satchel. He had tried to fight back. They had killed him without a second thought and taken his bag. It hit her like a physical blow. The locket. It wasn't Hank's. "Your mother," Faith said, her mind racing. "How did she die?" "Consumption," Hank said automatically. The doctor said. "Was she alone when she died?" "No, I was with her. And our neighbor, an older woman who helped care for her at the end, Mrs. Gable." Faith's heart stopped. She remembered the old man on the stagecoach. Before the attack, he had been talking to the woman next to him. He had called her Mrs. Gable, and he had given her something just before the shooting started. A small, heavy object he'd pressed into her hand. A silver locket. The woman who survived the attack wasn't Faith. It was Mrs. Gable. The outlaws had put the sack over the wrong head. They had left the wrong woman to die in the desert. "Hank," she said, her voice shaking, "I'm not Faith Turner." 6 months later, the last of the Barton gang, including Clyde himself, were captured near the Mexican border. The news reached the Double Creek Ranch, but it brought little comfort. The truth had changed everything. Faith, or rather, the woman who called herself Faith, had confessed everything to Hank the night she discovered the map. Her real name was Anna Gable. She had been on that stagecoach, had watched the Barton gang murder the prospector carrying the locket. In the chaos, the old man had thrust it into her hands, whispering, "For his son." When the outlaws had come for her, she had been mistaken for the other young woman on the coach, Faith Turner, who had tragically been killed in the initial attack. In her terror, Anna had played along, too afraid to correct them. The identity of Faith Turner had been a shield, a desperate lie to survive. Hank had been shattered. The woman he loved was not who he thought she was. His quest for revenge was tangled with a case of mistaken identity that had saved Anna's life but built their own on a foundation of lies. They sent a letter to the real Faith Turner's aunt in Tucson, explaining the terrible truth. The poor woman was heartbroken but grateful to finally know her niece's fate. The trial was a sensation. Anna Gable's testimony, combined with the map from the locket, was undeniable. The Barton gang was convicted not only of the stagecoach murders, but of the murder of Hank's father 20 years prior. The stolen silver mine was legally returned to its rightful owner, Hank Prescott. He was rich, he had his justice, and he was miserable. He and Anna lived in a state of quiet, painful distance. The love was still there, but it was buried under the weight of the secret. He couldn't look at her without remembering the lie. She couldn't look at him without seeing the life she had inadvertently stolen. Clara Holbrook, ever the pragmatist, sat them both down one evening. "You two are fools," she said bluntly. "The girl lied to stay alive, and you, Hank, you fell in love with the woman, not the name. Are you going to let a name destroy what you found?" That night, Hank found Anna packing a small bag. "Where are you going?" he asked, his heart clenching. "Away," she said, not looking at him. "You have your mine, your justice. You don't need me." "That's where you're wrong," he said, his voice cracking. He crossed the room and took the bag from her hands. "The silver, the revenge. I thought that's what I wanted. But it's just cold rock. It's nothing. Without you, I have nothing." He took her hands, the hands that had been so cruelly bound when he first found her. "Your name is Anna. You are not the woman I thought I rescued." He looked into her piercing green eyes. "You are the woman who rescued me from a life of bitterness and anger. I don't care what your name is. I love you." Tears streamed down her face as she fell into his arms. "I love you too," she sobbed. "I was so afraid of losing you." In the spring they were married again, this time under their real names, Hank Prescott and Anna Gable. They used the money from the mine not to build a mansion, but to buy the Double Creek Ranch when the Holbrooks decided to retire. They built a home, a real home, filled with warmth and honesty. A year later, their first child was born, a boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's steady gaze. They named him Matthew, after Hank's father, the man whose legacy had brought them together through a storm of violence and deceit. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching their son take his first wobbly steps, Anna leaned her head on Hank's shoulder. The desert stretched out before them, the same landscape that had been the stage for so much pain. But now it was just home. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked softly. "Every day," Hank said, his arm tightening around her. "I think about the man I was, riding out for revenge, and I thank God he found an angel in the desert instead." Anna smiled, her hand resting on her stomach where their second child was growing. "Not an angel," she whispered, "just a woman who got a second chance at life and found love where she least expected it." They had found their way through the lies, through the pain of the past, to build a future based on a truth that was stronger than any secret. A truth forged in the heart of the unforgiving frontier, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest treasures are not buried in the ground, but found in the hearts of those brave enough to love. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what you think. Was Anna right to keep her secret for so long? We love hearing from you. Thanks for watching.